Welcome to PB 101 course at IIT Bombay. Professor Srivastava is going to deliver his lecture in Molecular and Cellular Biology module shortly. Please mute your microphone and be ready with pen and notepad to take notes. Thank you. Welcome to PB 101 course at IIT Bombay. Please mute your microphone and be ready with pen and notepad to take notes. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Welcome to PB 101 Molecular and Cellular Biology. Cells are fundamental units of life. The tiny microscopic structure is composed of number of organelles. Each cell type has distinct characteristic features. The cell is made up of basic organic molecules like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, etc. In this lecture, Professor Srivastava shall walk you through the cells, describing its various components, mentioning the characteristics of different types of cells.
Hello everyone, welcome to BB 101 course. I'm Sanjeev Srivastava. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Cell and Molecular Biology module of BB 101 course. Before I start, I'd like to give you the course overview. So this course has 3 modules. First is Molecular and Cell Biology, Physical Biology, as well as Biomedical Engineering. Before mid-sem, there'll be 2 instructors, myself and Professor Rahul Purwar, and we will teach you MCB module. After mid-sem, there will be Physical Biology module, which will be taught by Professor Ambarish Kumar, and then Biomedical Engineering by Professor Neeta Kanekar. To make sure that you are not overwhelmed with exams only at the end, we are going to have quizzes throughout the lectures, and each instructor is going to have quiz of 5 marks. Then for the mid-sem, only the MCB modules will be covered for the questions from Professor Rahul Purwar and my sections, and those will be 20 marks each. So 50 marks before the your mid-sem, till mid-sem, and after mid-sem, Professor Ambarish Kumar's module will have 25 marks for the end-sem, and Professor Neeta Kanekar will have 15 marks for the end-sem. So module 1 has 50 marks, module 2 has 30 marks, and module 3 you will get 20 marks. I hope the marks distribution and scheme is now clear to all of you. To pass the course, minimum 30% is the requirement. Regarding my lectures, the MCB module, the first which I am starting, today I'll talk to you about introduction to biology and tour of a cell. Then next you have a tutorial which will be essentially from this lecture, L1, and then some basics will be covered in this tutorial. My lecture 2 will be on the cell cycle. And then we will have introduction to metabolism, my lecture 3. Genome and DNA tools will be lecture 4. And then last 2 lectures will be on genetics, especially Mendelian genetics and chromosomal molecular basis of inheritance. Now, what you may see in the blue colors here, tutorial distributions. So tutorial 2 will have contents from lecture 2 and 3. Tutorial 3 will have contents from lecture 4 and 5. And tutorial 4 will have contents from my sixth lecture as well as Professor Rahul Pawar's first lecture. Further, the quizzes I have mentioned the red color here. So the first quiz, which will be for 1 mark, will be from the first lecture, and that will be given at the end of the second lecture. And likewise, at the end of each lecture, there will be quiz, MCQ questions based quiz, which will be from the previous lecture. So I hope now you are clear for the 5 quizzes, which will be 1 marks each, 5 marks for my module, and 4 tutorials and different 6 lectures. All the lecture contents and the curriculum will be based on Campbell Biology 10th edition book. Lectures will be uploaded online and links will be provided to you so that you have access to all the contents. Even if you have poor connectivity of internet, you can watch that whenever you are available. I'm available on this email ID, sanjeeva@itb.ac.in. For any quizzes, we will have 2 type of modalities. One will be Kahoot and second will be online Google form based. There's a couple of instructions towards my lectures. So I will try to upload all the lectures at least 1 day before so that you have time to go through the contents. And that will really help you to overcome all the bandwidth issue, internet connectivity issues, right? Along with the video, in the video description, I will provide you a link which will have a Google form link where you can type your questions. And those questions, I can take it in the live class. So now what is happening is the first lecture, let's say I'm uploading in YouTube, but I'm still available in the lecture slot, which will be for the live class, right? And in that, I'm first going to revise you the important concepts once more, so that if something was not clear, I'll again repeat that few important concepts. I may also add a couple of new examples and case studies in the class time. And then I will first take the questions from the Google form, which you have filled, and try to answer some of those questions. Just think about, we have almost 700 students in each batch, which will be huge number. So a lot of people asking things randomly or, having so much online chat will be quite tedious. At the same time, if you have thought about the lectures beforehand, you have gone through the contents and write your queries in the Google form, it will be probably more streamlined. It is possible that 10 students have similar question to clarify a concept given in a slide which was not clear to you, and I can explain that again. So it will be much easier for all of us to run the course modalities in this manner. Nevertheless, I'm available for any online points and comments and questions during the class time. So as I mentioned, at the end of each class, we will have a Kahoot quiz. Kahoot is one of the online gaming system, which is pretty popular, and we like it very much for doing the quizzes for this type of courses. Even in my physical courses, when I teach at IIT Bombay, especially BB 101, a student really enjoyed playing the quiz like game on your mobile device. So we'll do that. That will be Kahoot quiz for. But this quiz will be given to you for practice every day. So one quiz will be like a couple of questions for you to refresh the concepts and get acquainted with the MCQ questions, right? But after that, you'll be given 10 questions, which will give you 1 marks from the Google form based stuff, which will give you 10 minutes or so that you have limited time to finish those quiz, and you can do that for 1 marks. So practice quiz will be given end of each class, each lecture, so that you are familiar with the concept, you are familiar with the MCQ type of questions. And Google form based quiz will be given at the end, which will be towards your evaluation. And the quiz is going to serve your attendance as well. Attendance is going to be mandatory, barring any exceptional case which you may have, which you have to inform me ahead of time. Attendance is going to be mandatory in the course, and quiz is going to be live. So every lecture in that way, I will have all of your attendance based on the quiz participation as well, right? So I hope now you are clear with the course modalities, the lectures, Lectures are going to be in two ways. One is I'm going to upload the lectures ahead of time so that you can watch the lecture, ask for any doubts to be cleared. And second, in the live class lecture time, I'm again going to repeat some of the important concepts, clarify your doubts, and then we will play Kahoot game as well as the quiz for the your 1 marks for each class. So let me give you outline of today's presentation. First, I'll try to talk about why we are offering this course, Biology for Engineers. And I'll try to give you some examples of how biology have really benefited uh, from engineers, and engineers have made some very nice observations from the nature, which has resulted into some devices and certain novel products which were otherwise not possible. Also, you will see huge increase in the big business tycoons, all the big companies who are really venturing into the biology projects. I'm sure I don't have to emphasize anymore after COVID-19 how important it is to understand biology and medicine, and that is something now whole world has recognized. But then in the second part, I'll talk to you about various properties which are associated with life, especially about the cell and its properties. I'll give you a tour of a cell and try to differentiate prokaryotic, eukaryotic cell, and how some of these important concepts have led to the evolutionary theories as well. So today's learning objectives, LOs, will be first, the concept for biology for engineers. Second is the compartmentalization, the prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. And third, the complexity of the cell, which is one of the fundamental unit, a living unit, but that is much greater than the sum of its parts. So while each of these important parts are very crucial, different cell organelles, but how together they're able to make it the living unit, which is quite important for the all the organisms. All right, so this question comes that why biology for engineers, right? I'm sure many of you would have apprehensions that why to study this course, BB 101, and why to study biology while you have already decided to move ahead in your career with the engineering discipline, right? Some of you may have even liked biology in the past and you did not get an opportunity to study biology because you have shifted towards engineering track, right? Uh, so a reason for offering this course is that given the situation how biology and medicine has become so important, and especially in the 21st century, it is really important to apply various type of biological principles and utilize different type of engineering skills together to come up with the new products, new designs, and new solution, which is not possible otherwise. Most of the time we work in engineers are different, and medical practitioners are different, biologists are different. Everybody works with their own comfort zone in their own area. Can we combine this strength, this knowledge, and make it more interdisciplinary and try to come up with the solution which were not possible earlier? COVID-19 definitely offers that opportunity where now you see that how one is able to come up with the new solutions by applying knowledge from different group of people, different set of scientists from whole world. They came forward, worked together, and tried to provide some new solutions, which was otherwise not possible. So in this manner, the scientific community has started showing their strength by working in the interdisciplinary manner. Most of the top institutes in the world, you name the big institutes which you probably are aspirant to work at some point, like MIT, Harvard, Stanford, uh, UC Berkeley. All of these top institutes, or Oxford, Cambridge for that matter, all of them have very strong biomedical engineering or biological engineering or bioengineering departments, where engineers, doctors, other basic scientists, they all work together. Our own department of biosciences and bioengineering is a good example, where we have people from medical background, we have people from engineering background, people from basic biology background. So a good one roof where scientists of different backgrounds, they all can talk, and they can work in the cutting edge problems together. So let me now share my screen and talk to you about why some of these points which I emphasized. We can also try to show the published evidences for those or some credentials which are available. So many problems which we are all aware of, right? Like which is beyond our individual domains or individual expertise. Whether you think about population explosion, pollution, global warming, different type of natural resource depletion, biodiversity or deforestation, climate change, natural disasters, and diseases, whether we talk about cancer or infectious diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, and more recently now COVID-19. They don't have any boundary. They work for everybody, everybody gets affected in the same manner. So, to tackle some of these major life problems, what we require is more interdisciplinary skills to find the effective solutions. And one of the good examples to get inspiration from is bio-inspired engineering. Many engineers who were not forced to study BB 101, but they just were very keen observer of nature. They made some keen observations from nature and design and tried to implement that in their own devices and found some really novel solution. Let me give you a couple of examples here. Let's talk about transport. The learning efficiency from Kingfisher. This beautiful bird, Kingfisher, you look at this beak design. It dives into the water and with very little splash, it can catch the fish. Now, an engineer in Japan, E.G. Nekatsu, he was a very keen nature observer and a bird watcher. He thought, how this kingfisher goes very silently in the water and able to catch the fish without making any noise, and try to overcome that limitation by trying to come up with a model of a train which used to make a lot of noise. This train with the flat end, when it passes from the tunnels and different bridges, it used to make a lot of noise. And he tried to make this model in the beak shape, and that really worked very well. And this bullet train, which are now one of the model examples for the their efficiency, energy, and being very quiet and super fast trains, these are designed based on the shape of the beak of the kingfisher. So this resulted into a quiet train, less electricity being used, which can travel very fast. Think about how it was possible if he'd have not made this observation from nature. Waterproofing. Let's take some lessons of waterproofing from this beautiful flower lotus. Lotus leaves have these crevices which are having the rough surface microscopically if you look at them, and they can actually trap the air so that now this surface becomes really hydrophobic, and water droplets will actually float on that. They will just roll down. So now this design, why it looks very beautiful, and one could just admire the nature about looking at beautiful flower like lotus. But there has been the creative people who have watched this creatively and thought, can we utilize that in some design? The company Green Shield Construction Chemicals, they try to come up with the paint which is based on the lotus effect. Think about even place like Mumbai, when we have so much rain in the rainy season. The buildings looks really ugly because water cannot, the paint cannot hold so long, in this kind of rain. So having these kind of lotus effect can probably provide you much more protection from the waterproofing and can give you more effective solutions. So this company came up with this particular lotus effect in their paint, resulted into higher water and stain repellency, which is quite needed to keep the buildings clean. Let's take next example, which is about architecture. How some of the huge buildings which require so much electricity, air conditioning, maintenance, even can you take some motivation, some lesson from termites? If you have been to some adventurous trip to a forest, you might have seen these kind of mounds. These termites, they are are famous to destroy the buildings, and of course, you don't like to see them around. But when you see these kinds of cemeterium, you will find that inside they maintain very cooling temperature, passive cooling, and the cool air that comes from these holes, which you see here, and that forces the hot stale air to go out from the top. So now it has made its own air conditioning system, where now it can keep its inside, really cool and stays happily. Now the big buildings like this, what is shown on the right side, which is the East Gate building in Zimbabwe, that was, really thought to how to maintain the electricity and air conditioning. And an engineer, Mick Pierce, he designed this building and thought about how best one could try to maintain the air conditioning system to be reduced and try to mimic what he learned from the termites. And he utilized the same kind of the holes and the air ventilation system, which has kept this building quite cool with very little electricity and air conditioning. So this building only uses now 10% energy for ventilation as compared to the conventional buildings of that size. Tsunami alert system. Now let us take some lessons from dolphins. These beautiful dolphins, when you see them doing some shows in different places, they're very beautiful, they play very well. They can recognize the call of their family individuals even as far as 25 kilometers away. And by employing some of the frequency in their transmission system, they are able to recognize each other and they are able to communicate to the different members of the family. So a company, Evologics, they came up with a high performance underwater communication and sonar system, underwater robotics, fluid dynamics, shape optimization. All of them were actually influenced from dolphin. And this dolphin resulted into development of high performance underwater modem system for data transmission, which is also currently employed in the tsunami early warning system in Indian Ocean. So these small observations can be so useful and they're practically available for catching up with these kind of natural catastrophes. Fog harvesting technology. Some lessons from this beetle, which is in the desert, known as Stenocara gracilipilis. This a beetle that collects the water droplets even when it is staying in the desert system and trying to use that to because it needs some water, so it tries to use that morning fog and makes those water droplets on its back surface and try to get these water droplets on the moisture roll down into its mouth to meet its water requirements. A similar concept was utilized by a student, Srirang Chitre. He is one of the IIT Bombay alumni and then MIT student. He developed this device, which is influenced from this design of desert beetle, and tried to make these fences which could be utilized in the arid conditions. And in the morning time, these water droplets can be collected in the bucket and the water utensils. And people who are staying in those areas really got positively influenced from this technology, which was the fog harvesting technology. And at least partially it was able to overcome their drinking water requirements. So I hope you are convinced that taking the motivation, taking the some of the ideas from the nature's creation and elements, and trying to implement that into some new designs and models can really solve some of the complex human problems. What I gave you is very few examples. There are actually a lot. So many examples are there where you will see that how engineers got really inspired from biology, and bio-inspired engineering is really one of the area for you to look into it to see that how many models, how many designs, how many projects are really in the practice, which was otherwise not possible. In addition to these bio-inspired engineering, you will really see that all the mega giants companies uh, who are working in the core engineering discipline, they're also showing a lot of interest into the different type of biological projects, right? And first example is this Google Brain project, which is based on artificial intelligence, which combines the open-ended machine learning research with information system with its huge computing resources. Google has several projects. Other project worth mentioning is the Smart Contact Lens project, where they have these glucose sensors, antennas, capacitors, and the chip is actually like in the sandwich between two contact lens layers. Uh, so now when the tear droplets they go into this film, uh, which if it contains glucose, it is going to reach to the sensor, and that could be used for the real time monitoring of glucose. Think about the patients who are having diabetes. They can really benefit immensely from these kind of devices. Other major giant is IBM. They have several projects in the areas of computational biology and system biology, and they're playing a huge emphasis about doing these projects. IBM has this, supercomputing power, IBM Watson, which has already proved its utility in different type of cancer diagnosis and cancer prognosis kind of advices. And more recently, it also has shown its worth in the COVID-19 time. So IBM, this Watson that works on essentially data resources, artificial intelligence, and blockchain technology. And it's during this particular pandemic, IBM has really showed its potential and community services by offering a lot of its resources free, like supercomputing power, virus tracking system, AI assistants. All of them they offered in the COVID-19 pandemic time, so that whole community can benefit from these resources. IT Bombay, which you might be surprised that we have so many engineering faculty and a lot of engineering research is going on in the campus, but there is quite a bit interdisciplinary research happening in the campus, and around 15% or so faculty members are also involved either only in the biology or in the interface of biology and engineering. Interdisciplinary projects are being done, right? And that, as you can see on the slide, it spans in different departments, not only just in biosciences, bioengineering, and chemical engineering and chemistry, but also in many other departments which are actively involved in doing bioresearch as well. Uh, Looking at the strength and the interest of faculty doing biological and clinical research in the campus, uh, we also have a healthcare research consortium at IIT Bombay, which includes different hospitals which are locally available here, including Tata Memorial, KEM Hospital, Hinduja, and different diagnostic companies are also participating in that. So all that provides a good ecosystem where you can see that starting from taking an idea which is quite important for a clinician to address a real life problem, and then coming up with a solution, implementing that along with the technology partners, testing them on the patients. All of them is really possible because that ecosystem has been provided to you. Different faculty members of IT Bombay, they work on different type of devices, and different sensors are being developed. While I cannot show you a lot of examples, but I just picked a few. This mobile-based portable diagnostic system for urine analysis to look for the blood sugar based testing. It is developed by Professor Rohit Srivastava and his lab, and they already have several startups and companies who have taken these products forward. Professor B. Ravi and his team has been working on various type of devices and implants which can help the patients who are having knee problems or different injuries. And the OrthoCAD lab and their devices from the BT lab has been very popular and has really reached to different type of different industries, and medical partners have already tested their products. Professor Devjani Paul and her team has worked on these sickle cell anemia based point of care diagnostics to look for how the RBCs, they are different in the normal blood cell versus sickle blood cell, and can that be utilized to develop a diagnostic device at the POC, which can be sent to the different remote areas for diagnosis purpose. Many students who studied at IIT Bombay, and they really got influenced and got motivated what they studied here in the campus, and then they tried to pursue some of the biological concepts in their career. And Dr. Harmeet Malik is one of the example. I have just shown his lab website. He got really influenced from Professor K.K. Rao, one of the senior faculty member of Bias and Bioengineering department, and tried to pursue his interest into the interface of biology and engineering, even when he joined as a faculty member in US. Dr. Vivek Jayaraman, he from the aerospace designs, he again worked on the interface of biology and engineering with the neuroscience as an interest. And Dr. Chetan Khosla, he's one of the very distinguished faculty at Stanford and a well-wisher and friend of IIT Bombay. In fact, in a meeting personally to him while visiting at his lab at Stanford, along with director of IIT Bombay that time, Professor Devang Kakkar, he mentioned that BB 101 and biology courses are really important for all the engineering students of IIT Bombay, and every student in the campus should get that exposure. And that statement, what he mentioned, was because of his experience of working at Stanford and looking at that Silicon Valley environment where engineers and Google and all other giants, they're all working together in that interface, right? And if you want to come up with the devices and solution, you need to have that fundamental knowledge from these technologies. So these are, I hope, some of the inspiration which you can take and think about how engineers are able to contribute in the interface of engineering and biology. But more recently, when the COVID-19 pandemic came, different faculty members of IIT Bombay from different departments, they all contributed immensely to try to understand COVID-19 and provide some solutions. While we have huge list of 30, 40 faculty members who have all done different projects to provide solutions, I'll just show you very few here. One is the helmet patient interface HPI, and this project was developed by Professor Ramesh Singh from Mechanical Engineering department when they came up with the non-invasive ventilators for the acute respiratory distress syndrome. And think about the utility for the COVID-19 patients who are having so much severe breathing problems, and these solutions can be so useful for these patients. Professor Amrish Kumar and his team made UV portable devices. And I'd also like to acknowledge that while we were doing some COVID-19 research on the clinical sample, we also utilized Professor Amrish lab-made designs and devices to transport these COVID-19 samples. So while it was so much fear to handle these COVID-19 patient samples, but in these devices which he made with the UV protection, it was very safe to transport even with the taxi and with the with the local transport medium. And so his devices are being used in the IIT Bombay Hospital and other places. Professor Rinti Banerjee, she worked on different solutions for COVID-19, and especially the self-disinfecting mask and different other solutions which she provided are very powerful for the textile industry, so that they have more antibacterial, antiviral capacity. Even after multiple rounds of washing, they are very stable and they can provide protection against COVID-19. Tapestry is one of the very famous name which you might have heard, developed by Professor Manoj Gopalakrishnan from the Electrical Engineering Department of IIT Bombay. They came up with this smart round pooling technique, which is to do the pooling testing of COVID-19. And this really became very much highlighted in various media and different other places. So I'm just showing you here a workflow of some of the work which we did in COVID-19 area. My lab primarily works on the clinical problems, looking at patients' blood sample, plasma, swab, other type of biological fluids, and apply that in different problems like cancer and infectious disease like malaria. During the COVID-19 time, we thought, can we develop some of the detection system to detect the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And also, when the patients are coming as a mild patient, can we make some prediction that these patients might be having disease severity, might be progressing, and these patients may be prone to the severe type of COVID-19. So two problems we wanted to investigate. While I'll not go in detail about what we did, but just to give you a nutshell of it, when the patients are coming to the hospitals, their swab samples are collected, which is being taken for the real-time PCR analysis. Now, same sample we took as well, and by that time we had no idea for what to how to do the protein extraction from these kind of nasopharyngeal swab, which is stored in the viral transport medium. We tried different extraction methods with a very simple and safe type of solution so that it can be implemented easily to the patient and to the hospitals. And we did precipitation with acetone or ethanol or isopropanol, prepared these protein solutions, digested them with trypsin, clean up these peptides, ran them in a technology known as mass spectrometer, which can separate these peptides and identify these peptide sequences, analyze that data, and develop some tests to detect these viruses. So one which I'm showing you here, we were able to detect from these COVID-19 positive patients some of the viral proteins and their peptides, which belong to the either replicase protein, nucleoprotein, or the spike proteins. We were able to detect those and developed the test from the mass spectrometers, which is known as SRM, Selected Reaction Monitoring Assay. We are also able to find the proteins which are quite different in the mild patient and severe patients, like what you see here, one of the protein angiotensinogen. Like, in the mild patient versus severe patient, you can see huge difference. Likewise, apolipoprotein B, fibrinogen gamma chain protein, many of these proteins which I showed you here are showing huge response difference from the mild group and the severe group of patient. And we, like these protein, we were able to come up with the panel of the protein, which could be useful for the patient's prognosis. You can make prediction that a patient might be prone toward the SARS-CoV-2 disease severity. And this could be very helpful for the clinicians to give more therapeutic intervention or probably hospital enrollment to these patients. So again, we have patented these, and if you're more interested, I'll be happy to talk in detail at some point. But just to tell you that, different type of instrument, technologies, concept from IIT Bombay has really helped in the pandemic time to come up with the novel solutions. So what in this course we are going to talk to you is not the conventional biology, which probably you never liked it, to just mug around the names of various, taxonomy and a different thing which you never liked. But what we are looking at more concepts, we are looking at a very interdisciplinary research-based field, how different scientists from the field of chemistry, physics, biology, mathematics, engineers, they can come up with the novel ideas and solutions to deeply understand the biological systems, provide some of the solutions to the societal problems. And those problems could be addressed in different type of sectors. Currently, we are all looking into health sector very actively, but likewise, many times you have issues of environmental issues, pollutions. Food is always going to be a problem. So we have to think about how to overcome many of these problems, how to do the brainstorming, put our strength and forces together, and try to come up with a new biology for the 21st century. This led me to the first learning objective. So why this course? We want to provide you some good background of biological concepts, which could be relevant to different type of societal impacts. I'm sure biology has impacted all of us very recently. Last 1 year in the lockdown and pandemic, we have seen how a tiny microscopic creature could really change the world, right? So biology is going to influence definitely all of us, and even your academic career, you will see it is going to impact you in some way, and it is better that you are prepared with this subject. The knowledge what you acquire in the engineering discipline, of course, you should focus on those. But along with those, if you're also understanding some of the concepts of physics, chemistry, and biology, I think those will be very helpful for you to come up with some more novel solutions. At IIT Bombay, especially in our department of biosciences and bioengineering, we also have this minors in biology courses, a basket of courses which you can take along with your major discipline. And those courses could be taken along with your these major courses, and you can take some of these minor courses in biology, and those then you can get 2 degrees. One will be major in your discipline and also minors in biology. And finally, I'm hoping that this course is going to at least make you appreciate the effort biologists and clinicians put in to understand the biological systems and to address different problems. And if you feel motivated, probably you'll be able to come up with the new projects, new designs, new thoughts. And I'd like to say that many of the BB 101 students, really, enthusiastic students and sharp brains, they came with us, they did a lot of projects. Even in the COVID-19 work, which I showed you, many of your senior from first year and other years of UG program, they're all part of this team. Almost 35 to 40 people worked with me on these projects, and some of them are also part of the patents and the publications which has just come from this work. So we do see a lot of enthusiasm in the UGs, even if they're from engineering background. But once they like a subject, they can contribute into even new technology development, even new drug designing and different type of solution which is not possible otherwise. Discuss which of the properties and processes are associated with life. The biological complexity is very difficult, very complex, which is really not possible to just explain based on the genes and how many genes we have. So you might have heard that different genome projects, they gave us an idea that how many genes different organisms have. And only recently, not very recently, but at least in the around year 2000, 2001, major genome projects got accomplished. And since then, many other organisms are being sequenced. And now we have idea that how many genes different organisms have. So like fruit fly that has around 14,000 gene, C. elegans roundworm around 19,000 gene, Arabidopsis thaliana 27,000, human Homo sapiens estimate was around 25,000, but by now we know this around 20,500 genes are there. So by looking at them, you cannot tell that which organism is more superior, which organism is more complex, because the gene numbers are more or less same, right, in different organisms. The central dogma of life, which starts from these DNA, the genetic material, and moves on to make the information, active information in the form of RNA. And then from there, the proteins are being formed. This is known as central dogma of life, which involves the complex processes like transcription, which is from the DNA to RNA formation, and translation, which is from the RNA to the protein formation. So this entire, the central dogma is very crucial for all the life processes. While each one of these biomolecule, whether we talk about DNA, RNA, or protein, they're equally important. They're all very crucial for life processes. But if you think about the functionality aspect of it, so genes remain static throughout the life cycle of a given organism. Whereas the active components, the RNA, they are being transcribed, which is going to provide you more active functional information. And then from there, proteins are being formed. And these proteins get modified in response to different type of stress, in response to different diseases. And body's immune system and immune response starts working on it to produce antibodies and produce the proteins to combat those responses. So proteins are very dynamic molecule, finally. And they are the one which is really helping for protecting different against different diseases, or they respond very well against different drugs. So they're very crucial. And studying these biomolecule comes under a different type of omics technologies that are being used. All the studying about all the genes comes under the field of genomics, which has quite evolved. Studying all the transcripts or RNA comes under the field of transcriptomics. Studying all the proteins together in totality comes under the field of proteomics. My lab primarily works on the field of proteomics, but also integrated omics to apply other technologies from genomics and transcriptomics. And by combining the power of these technologies and obtaining the information from these biomolecules, then we study them under the field of system biology. And that's where a lot of computing power and different computational background people, engineering students from computer science or electrical engineering, they become very important to bring a lot of programming knowledge and different type of simulations which can be run to analyze this kind of complex big data set and try to provide some meaningful information which is otherwise not possible if you just look at these biomolecule in its alone in isolation. But if you make them in the together, then probably that could give you more meaningful information which is applicable for the addressing different questions for physiology and medicine. So different organisms, if you just look at them, from outside, just with their morphology, they are quite different. But when you analyze them at the biochemical level, look at their DNA, RNA, or protein, you will find a lot of commonality and a lot of similarity in those. This figure is shown for a bacteria, E. coli. This is a model organism, fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. This is a plant which you probably recognize, Thale cress, Arabidopsis thaliana from the mustard family plants. This is C. elegans roundworm. Shown here yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and human Homo sapiens. So all of them look so different, right? And you can't think that there are some common elements in all of them. But if you really analyze them at the molecular level, look at some of the proteins which are common in all of these groups, their structure, their function, the gene sequences, you'll find a lot of commonality across all of these groups, which really lead us to the concept whether they arisen from a common ancestor, right? Whether there was a common ancestor from where all of these organisms got origin. The different properties and processes which are associated with life. Some of the beautiful examples which I have shown here, they all tell different type of important processes involved in life. For example, butterfly taking the nectar for its energy processing. Sunflower, beautiful orderly structure of the flower. Rabbit showing its ear, which is doing homeostasis to cope up with the heat while running very fast and looking at that environment to keep it cool. Shows the example of regulation. Pygmy seahorse tries to mimic its environment to protect itself from the predators in the sea environment. Looks very red in the coral environment. Oak seedling or other plants or other organism for that matter shows growth and development of predators. Response to environment is shown beautifully by this Venus flytrap, which is closed strap rapidly in response to the environmental conditions. And the damselfly, which is landing, it is getting trapped inside this flower. Reproduction is, of course, common phenomenon in all the life systems. Shown here is a giraffe with its baby giraffe. So from the organisms, now let's move on to the cell, which is an organism's the smallest and the functional unit. And if you think about the origin of life, that itself is a very interesting topic, but not the focus right now. It started billions of years ago, right? On the time scale, if you see here, almost 4.5 billion years ago, Earth formed. Different microorganisms came around 3.5 billion years ago. And probably the first primitive cell came around 2.2 billion years ago, with more oxygen atmosphere, which was conducive for growth of these cells. Then different type of cell and different organism, different macroscopic organism eventually came around 0.5 billion years ago. And you've heard about the interesting stories of dinosaurs, and then finally, more recently, the human being. So still in the large scale of evolutionary history, if you see human, we are still quite recent. Just to zoom you into the cell, what we are going to talk now. If you look at the human body, which is having billions of cells. So think about our skin and every component of body. They're all made of the cell, which is really microscopic, a small unit. And our body itself contains billions of cells, right? And each one of these cells, which is rounded shape shown here, they contain a small nucleus, which is contains all the genetic material. They contain the genes, the DNA, and all the genetic information which study for the DNA and RNA, they're all residing in these nucleus. The bottom part shows a more evolved structure of the cell, showing in addition to nucleus, there are different other organelle which is part of the cell to give them functionality. And now if you compare these, the left side image with the right side image, which is shown a car and its nut and bolts, you will find lot of similarity that how the cell different organelle, they work together. It's like the circuits are all connected with a master circuit, and here different nut and bolts of the car, they're all connected. Then only they can make a functional car. And likewise, a functional cell cannot be made if all these components don't talk to each other and make a functional unit. So there are scientists, especially from Stanford, which try to create these cell electricity models like this, where like the circuits of the cell, how they're governed and they are regulating different organelle and their activity. So think about how the design and the concepts of electric circuits could be employed to study the networks in the cell as well. This slide again gives you the broad overview of different type of structures, and in the scale which is given here, which you can see, of course you can relate some of these egg which you eat every day on this time on this scale, but now what we are talking is things which are mostly going down, so from 0.1 meter to 1 centimeter to 1 millimeter, then microns, 100 microns, and then 10 microns. So most of these cells which we are talking right now, which is billions of cells what we have, they are in this time scale, right? Or this, the unit from 1 to 100 micron, right? And when we talk about these microorganisms, like most of the bacteria, our different type of cell, they're all in this particular scale of 1 to 100 microns. Now you go down and you start thinking about now these viruses. These are much smaller in size, and that's also invisible, which is in the scale of 10 nanometer to 100 micrometers. And then you go further down, and then now you can look at the size of different biomolecules of proteins and these lipid molecules, etc. So different type of microscopy have really been a powerful way to study these cell and understanding that which are the organelle which are part of the cell, how they function, with their dysregulation, what kind of diseases may happen. So entire field of cell biology have really got benefited with the electron microscopy, with the light microscopy, and much higher resolution microscopes like super resolution microscopes. All of them have really enriched our knowledge of studying the cell and their behavior. So in this image, you can see that to study the cells in microscope, one could utilize different type of microscopy based methods. While I'll not go in much detail about all of this, that what this microscopy is about, but broadly you can think about two different type of microscope: light microscope and electron microscope. So in light microscope, the visible light that is passes through the specimens, and then through these glass lenses, you can now look into these images of the live cells. So to look at the live cell, essentially the light microscopy is being used. Now, contrary to that, the electron microscopy being used essentially to look at the dead cells, right? And unlike what you see here in the light microscopy. So in electron microscopy, it gets the beam of the electron which focuses through the specimens, and the resolution here is going to be inversely related to the wavelength of the light. And so these electron beams, which are having much shorter wavelength than what we have seen in the visible light, and they could be utilized for the scanning electron microscope or transmission electron microscope to study the dead cells. For looking at the ultrastructural detail of the cell, you have to, of course, kill the cell, and you have to fix those, and then you can look into the under the electron microscope, whereas the live cell could be studied with the light microscopes. So most of the images what we have shown here is essentially these are all different type of microscopic variants of the light microscope, except the scanning electron microscope and the transmission electron microscope, which is electron microscope based images. All right, so let us now talk in more detail about prokaryotic cells, and then I'll talk about eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells, these were the first most primitive organism, as I mentioned earlier, almost 3.5 billion years ago. And they have really seen all extreme environmental conditions, right? So that's where different type of diverse population to cope up with those environment has really resulted into the diversity in these microorganisms. I'm sure all the time you're hearing about different variants of these viruses of SARS-CoV-2. This is one of the recent example, but think about over the billions of years, these microbes have really evolved into various type of natural variations. So let me show you one of the prokaryotic cell, which is a unicellular organism. And these are really small, but quite well organized overall. And within one cell, they have to perform all the crucial functions of the life, right? So the cell wall, that is quite important to provide the shape to this bacteria or the prokaryotes. And inside there is a cell membrane. Then there's a cell wall, and then outside the very thick capsule layer is there. So often you have seen, like at home, when a pickle is being made, a lot of salt is added to avoid the these pathogens and these microbes to grow, because the high salt can actually prevent the bacteria or other prokaryotes to stop growing in them, and their actual content, they get shrink because of the high salt condition. And that's where studying these composition of the cell wall and the capsule becomes very important. Now the capsule, which is the outside, that is quite crucial, which is surrounded with the polysaccharides or the protein dense layers. It really provides a lot of protection to the bacteria against the environmental conditions. And then these are the sticky fimbriae, which is helping the bacteria to provide hair-like appendages so that it can attach to different substrates. And then on the different, scattered on the bacteria, is also flagella there. And those flagella could actually help into, motion and different type of activity of bacteria. They're composed mainly of three major parts: a motor, the hook, as well as the filament. And they actually quite differ from the eukaryotes. Prokaryotes, they lack a nucleus, defined nucleus within a nuclear membrane. And what you see is the free-floating DNA material, the chromosomes, in the cytoplasm of bacteria. And that is known as nucleoid. And then, which is not enclosed with the nuclear membrane. And then we have these ribosomes, which are also free-floating in these cells. So, this very simple single cell structure, which is not having any compartments, which you will see more in the eukaryotic cells, where there are more organelles there, and there is a lot of very defined compartments available. So this is the same structure which I just showed you, and essentially describes that these unicellular structure, they are without, they're very primitive form, they're without any defined nuclear membrane, and their dimensions are very small, usually 0.5 to 5 micron. Whereas when we talk about eukaryotes, those are much larger, almost 10 to 100 microns. And these bacteria, they are in different shapes. They are sometimes rod shaped, they are spherical, they are also spiral shaped. And based on those, people can actually recognize which group of bacteria they are. So in addition to these bacterial chromosomes and the nucleoid, which is free floating, bacteria sometimes also have these circular chromosomes, which is extra chromosomal material known as plasmid. and that could actually help into the replication, and that is quite important, especially for the genetic engineering based experiments. When we will be doing some of the genetic engineering DNA tools, you will see that the extra chromosomal material plasmid can be actively used for various type of recombination activities and other genetic engineering based approaches. Let me now describe you the bacterial cell wall, because that is quite crucial to understand the membrane structure. So here what you see, these are, in addition to plasma membrane, there's a peptidoglycan layer, which is a modified sugar which is cross-linked with some small polypeptides. And these are quite important to, in the bacteria to extend on their surface. And based on this composition of peptidoglycan and their thickness, one could actually get an idea for these are gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria. So while these gram-positive bacteria, they have a large amount of peptidoglycan. So in addition to plasma membrane, you have very thick layer of these peptidoglycans. But in case of other group of bacteria, which is known as gram-negative bacteria, you will find a slight change over there, because in addition to the having less peptidoglycan, they are also having additional layer of a membrane, which is outer membrane. So let's keep comparing these bacterial cell wall composition and differences in two group of bacteria, gram-positive or gram-negative. And the gram-positive, while they are more simple, they have the thicker layer of peptidoglycan and the plasma membrane. But the gram-negative, they are more complex actually, with three sandwich type of composition, where you have the thin layer of peptidoglycan, but you also have an outer membrane in addition to plasma membrane, and that outer membrane that contains lipopolysaccharides, which is mix of carbohydrates along with the lipids. So that makes it slightly more complex, overall cell wall structure, and therefore this information of cell wall composition of gram-positive or gram-negative type of bacteria is being used for the staining methods. And what I'm just referring here, gram-positive or gram-negative, that is essentially one of the staining method developed with the name of a scientist, which helps to define the composition of these cell wall and how these bacteria can show different coloration patterns when you stain these bacteria. So so I think these are really complex membrane structure, which is we don't have to study in that ultra level structural details. But I'm just trying to convey you the very basic organization for the composition of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, which will be helpful when we will talk about the staining procedures, what can be used for the gram-positive or gram-negative. All right, so as I just showed you the details, now you can see more a sketch of these, where we have now both gram-positive and gram-negative. You can see these bacteria, but if you look at them in the microscope, they show different coloration. And this concept of staining was developed by a scientist, which was a Danish scientist named Hans Christian Gram. And he thought, that first way of treatment to the patient when patient comes with a bacterial infection, how to provide them the first level of treatment, to start with. And that's where thinking about a staining method which could differentiate these bacteria can be very powerful. So so in this particular case, just by looking at the composition of these membrane, now you have clear idea that the gram-positive, while they have the thick layer of peptidoglycans. The gram-negatives, they have thinner layer of peptidoglycans shown here. They also have an outer membrane, which was missing in the case of gram-positive bacteria. Now, these gram-positive bacteria, these are purple or violet colored, and gram-negative, these are pink colored. Now, how these color come, that is requires different steps of staining procedure, and based on those staining, then you can determine that which one looks purple or violet, which one looks the pink color, and accordingly you can mention is that the gram positive or gram negative bacteria. So some of our course TAs of previous year, they have recorded this demonstration of the gram staining, which I'm going to show you shortly. But just to emphasize that it is very important to know about the staining pattern of these bacteria. Uh, to begin with, for a patient who is infected with any type of bacterial disease, the clinicians want to know that what should be the antibiotics which they should be, using against these pathogens. And that's where if they know that this is a, gram positive, sometimes they are more resistant to the antibiotics. Or if it is going to be, some gram positive bacteria, they are also showing resistance to some of the antibiotics. So some of these information could be helpful for the clinicians to decide what broad spectrum antibiotic they can start with. You might have heard about penicillin, which is one of the very popular antibiotic, right? And that inhibits the peptidoglycan cross-linking, especially in the gram-positive bacteria. And likewise, different antibiotics, they work on the principle of how to inhibit, the part of different cell wall compositions of these bacteria or application machinery of these bacteria, and accordingly they act on, to inhibit these gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria. Let us watch this live demo of performing the staining to know that which bacteria is gram-positive or which is gram-negative.
Let us get started with gram staining. This is the bacterial culture that we are going to use for making the smear. This is a clean glass slide. This is a nichrome loop which is going to be used to make the smear on the slide. This is a spirit lamp which we are going to use for heat fixation step. First, we will sterilize this loop so that there is no contamination in the bacterial culture. We will let it cool so that the cells do not die because if we dip the hot loop. We will take a loop full of culture and make the smear on the slide. We will first let it air dry. Once the smear air dries, we will use it to heat fix the smear. The heat fixation step is done so that the cells get stuck onto the slide and do not get washed up when we wash the slide. After the heat fixation step, we will add crystal violet for 1 minute. After 1 minute, we will wash off the stain and then add grams iodine. The grams iodine forms a complex with crystal violet and gets stuck to the bacterial cell walls. So when we wash the smear with decolorizer, the gram-positive bacterial cells stay violet and the gram-negative cells lose the primary stain, that is the crystal violet, and then get stained with the second counter stain, which is the safranin. We will now add decolorizer, which is acetone alcohol. After few seconds, we will wash off the decolorizer. We will now add safranin. After 2 minutes, we will wash off the safranin. We will let the smear get air dried. Once the smear has dried, we will add immersion oil and observe the smear under oil immersion lens of the microscope. For gram-positive bacteria, we will see cocci in clusters in purple. And if we have gram-negative bacterial cells, then we will observe red cells. That was all for gram staining. Thank you.
All right, thank you, TS. And I hope all of you got idea that how series of experimental steps to be performed. And at the end, then you can see in the microscope that how these color look like for these bacteria. Let us now talk about the eukaryotic cells. So we've already discussed about the prokaryotic cell, where you have seen that the nucleus was almost floating in the cytoplasm and does not have any defined nuclear membrane. Whereas in case of the eukaryotic cell, as you can see, the nucleus is defined with the nuclear membrane. And inside the nucleus, there is a nuclei as well. And now this nuclear membrane, which is double membrane structure, all the genetic material is lying within that particular membrane structure. Additionally, we have other endomembranous structure like endoplasmic reticulum, and sometimes ribosomes are on top of the ER, that is known as rough endoplasmic reticulum or RER, or smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and there is no ribosome attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. Then we have these Golgi bodies or Golgi complexes, which also help in the transport of the protein. And these ribosomes, which are the organelle to synthesize these protein. We have this mitochondria, which is the ATP generation powerhouse. While most of the genes are residing in the nucleus, but there are few genes which are also residing in the mitochondria. Peroxisome is another organelle which is there to catalyze hydrogen peroxide, and enzyme like catalysts are there. These are the microvilli. And now eukaryotic cell have this microtubule, and that contains the centriole. So that makes them different than the prokaryotic cells. I'll talk about each one of these organelles in some more detail as I talk about one by one for each one of these organelle and what their functions are. But the major difference is what you can see as of now, that U term comes like the true, carry-on is nucleus. So the eukaryotic cell have the true nucleus, whereas the prokaryotes, they have the primitive nucleus and does not have the membrane enclosing the nuclear contents. Now eukaryotic cells could be of two types. One is the animal cells, or other could be plant cells. While most of the organelle which we will be talking have the similar function in whether we talk about animal cell or we talk about plant cell, but there are few organelle which is quite distinct, and they provide some ability to these cells for coping up with different specialized functions in animal cell or the plant cells. So we have talked about endoplasmic reticulum, this is the flagellum, centrosome, cytoskeletal material, microvilli, peroxisomes, lysosomes, mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, plasma membrane, and nucleus with the nuclear membrane. The plant cell also have similar structure, but they have few distinct things, like there is a cell wall, plasmodesmata, which provides the connectivity with other cells. Then they also have plasma membrane, peroxisomes, mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, nucleus, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosome. Central vacuole is something new here, which is having all the deposits or the waste material can be collected here. Cytoskeletal materials are there as well. Chloroplast is, of course, one of the very specialized organelle in the plant cell only. In addition to the nucleus, which contains the genetic material and genes, chloroplast also contains DNA and some of the genes. So now, in plant cell, ideally you got nucleus, you got mitochondria, and chloroplast. All three of them may have their own unique genes. Let us now define some of these terminology and also talk about role of these organelle in some detail. So cytoplasm is, if you think about a balloon within which there is a liquid filled, right? So that is the cytoplasm, which is aqueous material. And it also known as cytosol, which contains protein complexes such as ribosome along with floating cytoskeletal material. And the cytoskeleton, what they are, like the way in human we have a skeleton, which gives us the shape and ability to stand. Likewise, the cytoskeletal material are the microtubules and components which we talked. They are able to provide a framework to the cell and provides a positioning to the organelles, and the compartments can be seen in the cell. They also help in the intracellular transport as well as the movement of the chromosomes. Vacuole, which I just showed you in the plant, which is quite distinct vacuole, helps in digestion of the macromolecules. Also, sometimes it works as a reservoir for the waste products and nutrients. So I'll go in one by one in each of these organelles and their function. So plasma membrane, it provides like an outer boundary, a separation where the cell can now conceive the signal from the outside, external environment. So it helps into the transport of material from inside to outside, and also receiving the signal from outside and conveying that to the cell. Just to pinpoint here that all the figures have been taken from book Campbell, which is prescribed book for this course, and the figure numbers are mentioned so that you can also follow those to the respective pages. So nuclear membrane, that is a double membranous structure which contains the most prominent organelle, the nucleus. And nucleus is the storehouse of all the genetic component, genetic material. And also, therefore, it provides a site for DNA replication to happen. RNA synthesis can happen over there. So all of these are important activities which are governed from the nucleus. Then we have these endoplasmic reticulum, which works like a FedEx system for transport and communicating the messages and ideas from one to other place, right? Like FedEx. So here there's a network of a smooth endoplasmic reticulum to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And rough endoplasmic reticulum, as I mentioned earlier, when there's a ribosome attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, ribosome is the site for protein synthesis. And so now the RER, when we say which is the rough endoplasmic reticulum, that also contains the protein is going to be synthesized with the ribosome. And a smooth endoplasmic reticulum is not going to be involved in the protein synthesis part. But it actually helps into the packaging of these proteins into the vesicle, which further being carried with the endomembranous system linked to the Golgi vesicles or Golgi complexes, which is more of the flattened structures. And like a post office, when it's going to now take the contents out. So exocytosis, or exo means out, cytosis means out of the cell. is going to help the protein to transport outside. Other organelle is peroxisome, which is contains a high amount of enzyme like catalase, which helps to degrade the hydrogen peroxide. It is also involved in breaking down the fatty acid molecules. Unlike mitochondria and some other organelle like nucleus, it is single membrane organelle and does not have any its own gene or genetic system. Mitochondria is, of course, very important, probably one of the most important organelle, which is also double membranous structure, and it contains its own circular DNA, which provides its a lot of unique abilities within the cell itself. It has its own unique activity which it can govern. It is the site for the oxidative metabolism, so provides the energy required for the cell. The inner membrane of the mitochondria, that is the main site for the ATP synthesis. Now, which are the key distinguishing features of the plants and animal cells? We have seen both plant cell, animal cell structures now. Ideally, what you can see, like cell wall was very distinct in the plant cell, that is present there. Animal cell, it is absent. Vacuole was very large in the plant cell. It is absent in the animal cell. Plastid is only present in the plant cell, which is absent in the animal cell. Glyoxysome is present in the plant cell, absent in the animal. Lysosome is absent here, whereas present in the animal cell. Centrosome is absent in the plant cell, present in the animal cell. I'm showing you here reference of two different video clips of showing plant and animal cell, how they look in the microscopy. And this is taken from the book video.
Differential interference contrast microscopy is used here to visualize mitotic events in a lung cell grown in tissue culture. Individual chromosomes become visible as the replicated chromatin starts to condense. The two chromatids in each chromosome remain paired as the chromosomes become aligned on the metaphase plate. The chromatids then separate and get pulled by the mitotic spindle into the two nascent daughter cells. The chromatin decondenses as the two new nuclei form, and cytokinesis continues to constrict the remaining cytoplasmic bridge until the two daughter cells become separated. As this plant cell, taken from a lily, prepares for division, the chromosomes first condense. Next, the mitotic spindle lines them up in the center of the cell. At the metaphase to anaphase transition, the sister chromatids of every chromosome pair separate suddenly in striking synchrony. The chromosomes are pulled along the microtubules of the spindle to opposite ends of the cell. After chromosome separation, membrane vesicles line up in the center and fuse with each other to form the new plasma membranes that separate the two daughter cells. At telophase, the chromosomes decondense in the newly formed nuclei.
All right, so while you see those beautiful pictures in the book, they are actually coming from these microscopic observation, and those are more creatively presented to give you the visual feel of all these organelle and how they look in the cell. But inside the cell, this is the microscopic images what you can see. So after understanding now the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, let us discuss about three domains of life. The diverse group of organisms, they have been divided into three fundamental groups: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. These are based on their biochemical characteristics. And a scientist named Carl Woese, he used 16S ribosomal RNA as a way to classify and broadly group these organisms, and found that they could be grouped into three domains: domain eukarya, domain archaea, and domain bacteria. And these fundamental groups, these are known as domains. So you have already studied about bacteria, which is prokaryote, and we have discussed about eukarya, which is under eukaryote. Additionally, there's one more group known as archaea. So both archaea and bacteria could be grouped under prokaryotes and eukarya under eukaryotes. There are different type of bacteria like green non-sulfur bacteria, spirochetes, chlamydia, green sulfur bacteria, cyanobacteria, all of them grouped under bacteria. Archaea, different examples are halophiles, the one which likes to live in the salt environment, thermophile, the one which likes or loves the heat, sulfolobus in the sulfur environment, methanobacterium with the methane gas loving environment. These are various type of extremophile. These organisms can live in the extreme conditions where other organisms cannot survive, and these are grouped under archaea. Both broadly are under prokaryotes. Eukaryotes are all other evolved group of organisms, which includes animals, plants, fungus, different type of algae and the molds, ciliates, diatoms, dinoflagellates, trypanosome, leishmania, etc. All of them comes from one common ancestor of all life, could be around 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, got originated. So while we discussed about two groups, the prokaryotes, especially bacteria, and the eukaryotes, we have just learned about a third group, third domain, which is archaea, which is also prokaryote, but it shows a common characteristic. Few things are common with the prokaryotes and few are common with the eukaryote. That's why it is considered in between these two groups. But it shows more similarity towards the eukaryotes than bacteria. So these archaea and the eukaryotes, they both have their own genome, which encodes with the characteristics protein known as histones. So these histone proteins, which are 8 in number, they attach to the DNA molecules and form a complex known as nucleosome in eukaryotes. So while that nucleosome is lacking in the bacteria, but these archaea, they contain these histone proteins. So RNA and protein components of these archaea and their ribosomes, they are more similar to the eukaryotes as compared to the bacteria. So overall, now what you have to start understanding and visualizing that there is a common link in between the bacteria and the eukaryotes, and archaea shows many of these characteristics, few shared with the prokaryotes, few shared with the eukaryotes. So just to summarize today's lecture, we started discussing about need for a partnership between biologists and engineers, and how I hope you are convinced that there are many problems which are beyond the boundaries and all the intellectuals have to contribute together. We then started studying about different processes and properties which are associated with the life. And I tried to highlight a couple of examples and the different diversities of these living organisms. We then started talking about prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell, some of their organelle and their function. Cell, which is very crucial, that is the basic unit of structure and function, and how different organelles, they provide a specific role, but together they are making the component which is much beyond their individual roles. And that's how the cell is the functional unit of life. So I hope you are now at least started appreciating, understanding the importance of the cell and different type of microbes. While you will have a dedicated lecture about bacteria and viruses from Professor Rahul Purwar later on, I'll continue my lecture about the cell and their organelles, but more importantly, the cell cycle and its regulation, how that is so crucial for different physiological processes. You can use the book Campbell, which is the reference book for this course. Also, I have used some examples from this particular book, New Biology for 21st Century, as a reference. So what is going to be next? Along with this video, I'm also providing you the handout, which is in the description of this video. You can download the handout. I'm also providing you a feedback form or the Google form where you can actually put your questions from different slides or any specific question which you would like me to address in tomorrow's live session. So please fill those forms after watching this lecture. And then, of course, we'll be meeting again, and we'll talk about the cell cycle in the next lecture. Thank you very much for your attention.